Hello, fellers.
Hi, Rick.
Live from the Talking Joe Studios, it's Talking Joe.
Talking Joe is on the air.
Hey, it's me, Mark, and welcome to Talking Joe, the G.I. Joe Comics podcast. If you are new to the show and discovering us for the first time, you can find out all about us over at talkingjoe.co.uk. That is the website. Now, today we will be interviewing a very special guest. It is artist, letterer, and comics legend Rick Parker. And joining me, as always, to talk to him, it's a real American Tim. It's Tim Finn.
Hello, Mark, and hello, listeners. Artist, letterer, writer. Don't forget that Rick Parker didn't just draw, but also wrote his new autobiography and also lettered it and also colored it. And here he is.
Here he is indeed. Welcome, Rick.
Ta-da!
Fantastic.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Here is the introduction. You could nod along to what sounds right and shake your head to what sounds wrong. So, Richard Lowell Parker was born in 1946, and it is an American artist, writer, and cartoonist whose humorous artwork has appeared in The New York Times, The Village Voice, Time Magazine, US News and World Report, Life Magazine, and various comic books published by Marvel Comics, as well as fine art. In 1966, Rick Parker was drafted into the United States Army, but got his start in the comics industry as a letterer for Marvel Comics in the late 1970s. Parker is widely known as the artist of MTV's Beavis and Butthead comic book published by Marvel from 1994 to 1996. He wrote and illustrated his own graphic novel Deadboy in 2010, and his graphic novel memoir Drafted is out now, and he is busy working on the sequel, The Artiste. But of all his accomplishments, possibly the high point must be, surely, as the creator who worked on the most issues of Marvel's G.I. Joe outside of writer Larry Hama, as the letterer for issues 11 through to 38, alternating with Joe Rosen, and then a long run from 71 to 141. Yeah, so we're called Talking Joe. We're not called Talking Beavis and Butthead. So we will probably focus mostly a little bit with a sort of singular focus on G.I. Joe, but we are more than happy to explore your time in the Marvel bullpen, talk about Drafted, and much more besides.
I do have a specific Beavis and Butthead question for when we get to the 90s.
Okay.
So where should we start? So I mean, your beginnings are definitely explained in Drafted, but in terms of your career, that is much more recent. So let's wind back a little bit, maybe to your start at Marvel. Should we get there?
If you want, yeah.
How does your journey take you to Marvel Comics in the 1970s?
There was an attractive woman in my psychology class when I was a graduate student at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn. And one night I asked her if I could walk her to the subway because, Brooklyn, New York at 10 o'clock at night in the old days was not a place I wouldn't think for a single woman, to walk alone. So being raised down south where you're supposed to be chivalrous, I said, can I walk you to the train? Because she lived in Manhattan. And she said, sure. So as we were walking over there, I asked her as she was about to go down to the subway, I said, would you like to go out with me for a cup of coffee? And she said, no, I can't. I said, why not? And she said, because I've got to go home and work. I said, what kind of work do you do at 10 o'clock at night? And she said, I'm a freelance letterer for Marvel Comics. And I thought, I'd never heard of Marvel Comics, but I thought that sounded like a pretty cool job. And, after a week or so, we started dating, and I was at her apartment and I saw what work she was doing. And I thought, wow, I could do that. I mean, there's nothing to it. And I had a terrible job making about $3 an hour working at in a basement of a building underneath the Brooklyn Bridge for a furniture designer, grinding the rough casting off of brass plumbing fixtures. The dust was all over my face. My face would turn green. The dust was all over my clothing, and all my knuckles and fingers were all skinned off, from scabs and things from working at the grinding wheel. I was making $3 an hour. And one day I showed up at the printmaking studio, and the head of the printmaking department said, "What are you, a chimney sweep?" And it was kind of embarrassing. But anyway, she said she made about $300 a week. So I thought, wow, damn, I wish I could, do something like that. But I didn't think it would be cool to go to work at a company where somebody that I was dating was also working and doing the same kind of work. But, time passed, and, she got married. She met somebody and got married, and they moved to Arizona. And then by that time, I was a cab driver, and I was passing Marvel Comics one day, and I I saw Stan Lee come out of the building, and he was talking to John Verporten, who was the production manager at the time. And I think, oh, look, I remember that place. That's the place where my girlfriend took me. Ooh, she doesn't live in New York anymore. I'll bet if I went up there, they'd give me a job. So that was when I first got the idea that I wanted to go to Marvel Comics to work. I never was planning on having a real job, because I was going to be one of those artists that some art dealer discovered, and they just told me, just stay in your studio and you produce the work, and we'll send you a check every month. And that's really that's how I thought it worked. I thought, I would be discovered by some art dealer. That was my plan. I had read that in Art Forum magazine when I was in high school, and I couldn't start to make it. I've always felt very confident in myself as a creative person, whereas, I often think that I don't really know, how to do things in the real world or in my own best interest. But it was really lucky that I met her, because she was key to my getting into Marvel. And when I went up there with her, she said one day, "Would you like to go meet some of the people at Marvel?" And I said, "Sure." So we took the subway up there, and I will say that was the greatest group of people some of the greatest people, the funniest people. They were a riot. We got invited to a screening of The Exorcist once, and they were making funny comments during coming up to the film being shown. And I thought, man, I love these people. This is, the kind of people I want to work with. But, I couldn't, I wasn't going to go to work in competition with somebody that I was going out with. But it eventually worked out all right. I worked there for about 8 years, actually.
Okay, so Rick, it's 1977, and you get hired at Marvel as a letterer and a production
lettering
artist.
corrections. I was doing lettering correction. Yeah,
lettering corrections. And in the previous couple of years, up to 77, you have been a taxi cab driver in New York, and also a fine artist, painting and making assemblages for galleries.
Yes, and I exhibited my work in the window of my studio, which was a street level studio in Soho, which was an area that was full of artists and people who were interested in art.
So when you get to Marvel, what do they see such that they feel comfortable hiring you as a lettering corrections letterer and a production artist?
Well, they were. First of all, I hadn't been up there, and it had been about 2 years, I guess, since I went up there, maybe 3 years, and they remembered me. They said, "Oh, you're the boyfriend of I don't know whether I should say what her name is, but she, and we'll leave her out of it temporarily anyway." And they said, they wanted to see samples of my work, so I brought in some samples, and they could see immediately that I would be able to letter. I'd been lettering my notes in high school, and all the writing that I did was all capital letters, which was, very similar to comic book lettering. And I'd been drawing my whole life, so being able to draw symmetrical balloons and, around the lettering, and, doing sound effects, all this stuff was very natural to me. I had a lot of, natural ability in that area. And they introduced me to Mori Kuramoto, who had been the letterer for Marvel, and he gave me a couple of pages and looked at my work and said, do a couple of pages and bring them back. And I was back there the next day, and they hired me on the spot to work there. And I was assisting Jim Novak. Jim Novak was the person that was doing lettering corrections, and the person who had been working with him was quitting to get married, and so the job was open.
So you were now going every day. You were on
Yes,
staff.
that's
You were
that's
not a
right.
you were not a freelancer. You were not working from home.
Right. I immediately went on to staff, and I worked there from 9 o'clock in the morning until about 9 or 10 o'clock at night when they kicked me out. Most people left at 5, but I stayed there and kept working. I loved it, actually. And after 6 months, I began getting. They said if you work here for 6 months, you might be able to get some freelance work. And if you finish all of the lettering corrections and things that we ask you to do, and you have a Marvel freelance job, you can take it out and work on it. So I thought and you can make extra money that way. He said, because we can only pay you $175 a week. This was in 1977. That sounded good to me, but apparently it's not a lot of money. But I could make extra money by working on my freelance work. So when the day would end, I would take out my freelance work and work on it, for 2 or 3 hours, to make extra money. And also during the day, if things were slow and there was nothing to do, rather than just sit in my desk or walk around talking to people, I could take out the freelance jobs and work on it. And my page rate was $7 a page to begin with, and it took about an hour to do a page. So if you could make $120 a week extra, by doing that, and then you're making around 300 or something a week, which was good. My rent was $133 a month. That's what I was paying in New York City for a 1,000 square foot, storefront loft with 13-foot ceilings or 11-foot ceilings. It was great. I loved it.
And how did the freelance work come about?
In those days, this was 19. It was around the maybe toward the end of 1977, and maybe in October, November, I decided that I was ready to do some freelance work. It had been 6 months, and I always play by the rules. And so I copied a page of the dictionary. I copied the first page of the dictionary with the letter A on it, and there were lots of different fonts and everything. I just made a reasonable facsimile of that on an 11 by 17 piece of paper. And when the production manager, John Verporten, was away from his desk, maybe at lunch or something, I left the thing on his desk, and he found it. And later that day, his secretary came out and said, "Rick, John wants to see you." So I went out, and John was sitting, rocking back in his chair, puffing on his pipe, and he's looking at my page. And then, I could see raised his eyebrows a little bit. And then he bent over and pulled out a drawer and handed me a 17-page story to letter with a rubber band around it. In those days, they'd give you all 17 pages of the original artwork, except for the first page, which was saved for Gaspar Saladino, who Marvel, that was the best letter, or who they thought was the best letter. He got all the splash pages for all of the books. So if people ever look at those books from those days and they see that the lettering on the inside pages does not match the lettering on the first page, that's because Gaspar did all of those things, but he was uncredited. But that was a Hulk number 219. It was written by Lynn Wein. It was penciled by I think it was penciled by Herb Trimpe and inked by Ernie Chan. And I might be mistaken about the penciler in that. Anyway, I took it home and I worked on it over the weekend and brought it back on Monday morning. And they like that because the books come out every 30 days. And, they need people that they can really depend on to be productive. And I love working. So, I don't like the things that a lot of other people like: going out, having fun, seeing your friends, all that stuff. That's not what, floats my boat, But I guess I'm a workaholic. But anyway, because all those other things involved, social interactions with people, which made me very nervous, So I just stay home and work. But when he saw that I was able to bring out, to do the job over the weekend, he immediately assigned me another job to do. And they discovered that I was somebody that was I was fast. I never really tried to be the greatest letterer that I could be. I'll be honest with you guys. I was thinking of this as a job. This is what I did to make money. I was still thinking my main purpose in New York as an artist was to do my own creative work. And I was getting into shows, and I liked what I was doing, and people seemed to like what I was doing. And but I could never make any money at it. I had to do something, to support myself. And when I realized that I could work at Marvel, which was a fun place to work, they offered me something that I was naturally good at. It was it was great, but I was still able to do my own creative work, in my spare time, which was all the rest of the time that I wasn't at Marvel.
And I guess if you're being paid $7 a page, you get paid the same amount whether you spend 1 hour or 2 hours or 3 hours on that same page.
That's right, that's one of the reasons why I loved lettering G.I. Joe. Can I talk about that for a second?
Yes.
Okay. Well, first of all, Larry Hama, who's recently inducted into the Harvey Kurtzman Hall of Fame, is a legendary creative person, man of many talents, and I loved the scripts. By the time I was lettering G.I. Joe, it was 1982, I think, when we first started that project, and I had been lettering for Marvel for about 5 years, and I could see instantly when I saw the script and the artwork for G.I. Joe that this is some of the best stuff that Marvel is putting out. So I tried to do the very best that I could on that material. I took, extra time, took extra pains to do it. And Larry's scripts were beautiful. They were clean. There weren't that many. There were maybe sometimes 15, 16 balloons on a page. And it did not take an hour to do those pages. Sometimes I could do 2 or maybe, if I'm lucky, 3 pages in an hour. And if you're the person who's working for a page rate, you love it when you get a job like that. Most of them are not like that. But that was a primo job, and I loved doing it. It was just so clean, so professional. And, it was great. It was one of my favorite projects because it was a moneymaker, for me. And when when Larry, unceremoniously, fired me from the gig, it was a painful, it was a big loss. That's all I can say.
I want to get to that.
Yeah,
but I want to spend a little while on
of course,
lettering in G.I. Joe before we
Sure.
get to that. All right. So
Right.
I want to go back a step. You have mentioned Gaspar Saladino and Larry Hama as recently as 3 weeks ago at a convention panel mentioned Gaspar Saladino, and he has referred to learning the Gaspar Saladino alphabet. And Saladino was a DC letterer, and he lettered their covers and their page ones. And I think I have a pretty good eye for letterers' styles, and I feel like your work looks more like Jim Novak than it does a lot of other letterers. But I admit to not being familiar with 60s and 70s Marvel letterers. So
Right.
with all that in mind, can you talk a little bit about typography and alphabets and the actual letter forms, like a style, shapes, what you learned from Jim Novak and what you were trying to do with your letters?
Well, I didn't really, honestly, I'll tell you, I did not learn that much from Jim Novak. I was disappointed that Jim, anytime I ever asked Jim anything, Jim did not welcome me with open arms to Marvel, which was, was kind of unusual. I mean, I don't know what it was, but I would have loved to have been embraced by him when I first started there, because I really wanted somebody to, show me the ropes. But he kept to himself. He was very professional. I could see that his work was top notch. I consider him one of the best letterers ever. And he was a nice guy. For whatever reason, we never hit it off. And anytime I asked him what should I be doing, because we don't have any lettering corrections right now, he'd say, practice your open lettering. That's what he'd say. And so, that's what I did. Although I didn't really love open lettering. I love lettering the inside of the books, with the balloons and stuff. I thought that was interesting because to a certain extent you're looking at the artwork and you're reading the scripts, and it's a learning experience. Practicing your open lettering, all you're doing is becoming a better letterer. But I didn't emulate his style as much as I tried to be like John Costanza and Joe Rosen. Those were the two people who I really, and I love Sam Rosen's work, but I didn't try to copy it. But the best way to learn how to do, Larry was referring to working for Gaspar or working on emulating Gaspar's work, is to trace it, to trace over the letters that they actually do, so you can see how they're actually made. An A, for example, you'd put the pen down. I would put the pen down on the point on the paper and make a diagonal line from the top to the lower left, and then make a line from the top to the lower right, and then make the crossing bar. And that's how you make an A. The main thing I learned with lettering is that it's got to be easy to read. And the letters, obviously, being symmetrical is good. People like things that are the same on both sides. I think one of the biggest mistakes people make is they don't leave enough air around the lettering in the balloon. Leave white. They need more white space. Mobius does a beautiful job of that. He doesn't draw the balloon right up to the letters. Style is not as important as readability. And of course, you have to make sure that the balloons are placed on the page in the proper location, so that when the reader reads the books, that they go from the balloon that they're supposed to the next balloon that they're supposed to. And it can get, some people don't do a good job at that, and it gets confusing to the reader. And once the reader's confused, they're not feeling really good about it, and a lot of the time they'll just stop reading right there. And that's not what you want to happen if you create material. You want people to read it all the way through until the end. Just like when you're having a conversation with somebody, you don't want them to suddenly roll their eyes and say, oh, I just remembered I got to put some money in the parking meter. They want to leave. But it's a conversation, really, between the creators of the book and the person who's perceiving it. So you got to make it as easy and pleasurable as possible, and as easy as possible for them.
Yeah, I mean, I've often heard that for lettering, it's kind of the invisible art form, that you don't necessarily notice it quite as much, but when it's done badly, you really notice it because it stands in the way of you in the story.
Well, I was I was looking at your the show that you did with Larry, and it was interesting. Larry said he believes that you should be able to look at a comic book without even reading the material and understand what's going on. I think he mentioned Akira is a good example of that. What were you just saying? Tell me, Mark, what you were just saying. I kind of lost my train of thought there.
I said that you don't always notice lettering apart from when it's done badly. Right. That's when you really notice it.
Right. Well, it's impossible. I was going to say it's impossible to read a book without without seeing the lettering, and you don't want people to be distracted by the lettering. You want it to be. You don't want them to notice the lettering. I even, we want to talk about Beavis and Butthead, but on the lettering, I tried to make the lettering kind of fit with the artwork. I didn't even use an Ames guide, on that book, which was very unusual. But the lettering takes up space on the page. It's impossible to look at a page of comic art and not see the lettering. It's taking up, physical space on the page. People don't realize how important the lettering is. It's so easy. There's so many different things that go into being a good letterer, and it's so easy to do it badly. But Marvel had some really good people lettering for them. I mean, I don't remember ever seeing any lettering, and I did lettering corrections there for years, that I thought this person should not be lettering. Everybody that they had there was a pro.
When you talk about lettering corrections, you mean fixing small mistakes that the editor has found.
Right. Or they've discovered that they want to say it in a different way. So you have to maybe change some of a sentence in the balloon, or redo the entire balloon, or something like that. And you have to match the style of the dozen or so different letterers that were working there at the time, which is, requires you to have the kind of visual perception that notices stuff like that. I mean, when I first started working there, just as a goof, I put out this thing called the lettering examination, and I circulated it to everybody at Marvel. And there was, a list of S's, for example. There were 12 S's, and there was a list of names of all the Marvel letterers. And the person was supposed to match the S to the letterer. I mean, I thought that was my way of trying to tell them that this is an important, art form. And most people just took it as a goof. And I don't remember. I think it might have been Dave Cockrum had so much fun with that. The answers that he came up with he didn't even try to do it. He just came up with funny answers, and there were balloon shapes that
Could I follow up?
Sure.
So besides sort of style and letter forms of normal lettering, can you talk about sound effects?
Let's talk about SFX, baby. Let's talk about pew and scree. Let's talk about shooting gun things and the sound effects. We'll see. Let's talk about SFX. Let's talk about SFX.
I think people who don't think about lettering might more quickly agree that that's a kind of art in and of itself. Yeah. I'm thinking of G.I. Joe sound effects that are particularly sort of explosive sound effects, like a giant kablam for a missile or a bomb hitting, where the edges start to get crunchy.
Right.
So can you talk? Because this is basically a kind of cartooning.
Yes, lettering is an art. It's an art form, and there are people who are better. Some people are better at doing sound effects than others, but that is the one part of lettering where I think that the letterer is allowed the most freedom and the most, it's where you can kind of do your thing. And, I thought of myself as a person, who could draw. And, I thought of myself as a creative person. And I mean, I had a lot of fun with the sound effects. That's about the only time you can actually have any fun, is doing the sound effects, particularly if, it's a book with a lot of sound effects. But, I had a lot of fun with that, and that's where the letterer can really show themselves as an artist, I guess. But you want the whole thing is to try to match it to the artwork. You don't want it to be, you want the lettering to kind of to match the artwork. Well, when I was doing Beavis and Butthead, since it was my artwork, I felt very comfortable. And I was never intimidated until much later on in my career doing lettering. I was never intimidated by any of the pages that I was working on. It didn't matter to me whether Stan Lee had written it or whoever it was. I just, I felt completely at ease, which is kind of interesting to think about now, because, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, somebody sent me a page of a big Silver Surfer head that was drawn by Herb Trimpe, and it had been lettered by Sam Rosen. And the man needed the artwork put on there. It was a recreation page. He needed the lettering put on there. And I looked at the lettering, it was by Sam Rosen, and I thought, there's just no way in hell that I'm going to be able to do anything that looks as good as what Sam Rosen did. And I was really intimidated, and it disturbed me, that I wasn't able to, I didn't feel the comfort and the ease that I once felt when I was working at Marvel. But if you're doing stuff all the time, it's easier than if you have to pick up a pen and you haven't lettered anything in a few years, and now you got to letter something this, you're going to be the weak link in the chain here. But the guy said it was fine. He didn't see any difference, but I could tell. Not there. There was only one Sam Rosen. I'm not that person. But anyway, lettering it can be a lot of fun. It's something very zen about it. Also, I liked lettering because you could just immerse yourself in it. It took maybe I don't know 6 to 8 hours perhaps to letter an entire issue. And I don't think I ever did an entire issue in one sitting, but I could letter 10 pages in a sitting, and the time stops. You go into that zone and you letter the pages, and next thing you know, it's 4 hours later. And, it requires a great deal of concentration too. That's the other thing, because the marks that you are making, you really have to be concentrating on what you're doing. You can't be thinking about something else. Every mark is a deliberate, movement of your hand. And in addition to that, the pen's got to be right. That you have to have the right amount of ink in your jar, so you don't have to. When you put that mark down on a piece of paper, you know exactly what it is. There's no room for any accidents. You become a machine, really, and that's good. I was a machine.
We were talking a little bit about the sound effects, and I've put on some of my favorites from the pages of G.I. Joe on the screen. And yeah, obviously, it's sort of when the sound effects are working, they're very sympathetic to what's going on the panel, and they're sort of bringing a lot of energy, but without sort of disrupting the storytelling. But how prescriptive were the sound effects on the script that you were given versus what went on the page? Was it a case of that's the word on the script, that's the word that's going in, or did you have some discretion about what goes in?
Well, no. On the script, it would be F. It would usually be on a piece of typewriter paper, and the balloons would be numbered, and number 7 might be VIP, VIP, VIP. It would be a numeral 7, a period, a space, and then it'll say F. It'll say S. FX, and that's it for sound effects. Then there would be a colon, and then there would be some more space, and then in all capital letters it would say VIP, VIP, VIP. Now the only discretion for rat tat tat might have been you don't have to count the number of rats in the tats. You could, but aside from that, I mean, you weren't allowed to change the spelling of the word. Ka-chong is what Larry wanted, and ka-shunk was what Larry wanted. And, Larry knew what sound, he wanted. If somebody's jamming a magazine into a, whatever kind of weapon that is, it looks like I don't know about these weapons, some kind of machine gun.
Yeah.
And also when you're working, an Uzi. And when you're working for Larry, goddamn, it's Larry. I mean, it's got to, you better do a good job. I mean, I won't say that I didn't try to do a good job for Howard Mackey or Don. Well, I don't remember Don's last name. Sorry, Don, if you're listening to this. But anyway, Larry, Larry expected people to do professional work, and he didn't work for Larry unless you were up to professional work and doing good professional work. Larry was he was an editor who expected, he cared about the material and he wanted things to be done correctly. And I never got any feedback on the lettering from any of the editors at Marvel. I don't think I ever heard anybody say anything positive or negative about my lettering. They just assigned you the job, you did the job, and you never heard a word about it, which I kind of liked. I think that it's nice not to be criticized, and particularly if you're a young, sensitive, artistic type. You don't want people picking your work apart. You guys don't want me to tell you all of the stories in the Artiste, so I'll just let you ask the questions. I won't go off on any more tangents.
You mentioned Larry there. I think your desk was just outside Larry Hama's office. Was that right before you got the book, or after you got the G.I. Joe book, or did you get the G.I. Joe book just because you were within reaching distance of Larry?
I think it might have been because I was sitting right outside Larry's office, and all he had to do, or the assistant. I mean, Larry didn't come out, and sometimes Larry would come out and actually give you the job, but in general, it was the assistant that the letterers were dealing with. But I do remember Larry coming out at one point and just stepped outside of his office, and my desk was right there, and he handed me, a lettering job. And so that was convenient, and they knew that you did, your work was up to snuff. Although I will say that I did not consider myself one of the best letterers at Marvel. There were other people who I think Joe Rosen was better than me. John Costanza was better than me. Jim Novak was certainly better than I was. Tom Orzechowski was a better letterer than I was. There were a lot of people there, but I think what appealed to them about me was I got the job done, and it looked good.
I want to ask a craft question because you have just identified several letterers who, in your mind, were better letterers than you.
Yeah.
And I think we all have a general sense, but I'm wondering if you can be more specific. What makes a great letterer?
Well, okay. Well, looking at this page, for example, the first thing I look for now, this has been 40 years since I've lettered this page, and I would say that the credit box looks fine. I don't like the title, like Chimney Sweepers Come to Dust. I do not like that. I think I probably put that schmutz on the lettering because of dust and chimney sweepers. So that might have been what I was thinking. I can dirty up the lettering a little bit. The sign, Fort Wadsworth, that does not look like any sign that I have ever seen before in my life. The rest of it, United States Army authorized personnel, okay, that looks okay. And the balloon, the captions look fine, and the balloon lettering is fine. The spacing of the letters, and that last balloon in the lower right-hand corner, the spacing might have been able to be a little bit better. But and these days, I pencil in all of the words if I was lettering by hand, I would pencil in all the words before I would ink them. But in those days, you look at the script and you just start winging it. You just start putting in the words, and you rely upon your own judgment about how many words can I get on this line before I have to go and start over again. But ideally, a person should take great pains to make sure that the words are spaced as well as they can possibly be spaced. Now, what happened, and that's only 2 words, so, wasn't that hard to figure out how to do that one. When there's a little bit more copy, like in the caption, for example, the third line, that had taken place at Fort Wadsworth, it might have been better to put that on the previous line and, centered it. If this involves really stopping to try and figure out how to make this as good as it can be. And, that's the art. At war with the reality of the situation is I've got to do this page and get it over with. I can't be too precious about it because, there are 21 other pages that they want to get done. And sometimes they need to get the pages done that day and send them out to the inker, because the last thing you want to happen is for the book to miss shipping. So this is why I was successful as a letterer, is because I was able to keep the ball rolling.
In terms of the sequencing of who does what on the book,
yeah.
This point in the early mid 80s, it would be that the pencils are sort of done on the full board, and then the second person that sees that board is then the letterer to ink in the letters before
right.
Then you hand it to the inker to ink over the remaining pencils that are still visible, apart from the bubbles.
Yeah, what I'd get a manila envelope with the entire issue in there, and it would be along with a typewritten script, and it would just be the pencil lines. There would be nothing else on there. The letterer's job is, the first thing you do is you have to rule the borders on the pages. Then you have to place the balloons where they're going to go. The placement would be provided to you by the editorial department. It was a full-size photocopy, or sometimes it was a smaller size photocopy, which wasn't as good as the full size. And they would tell you generally where the balloons were going to go. So you transfer very loosely. You draw circles across the page and very lightly in pencil. And then you would have to rule up the guidelines for all of the lettering. And then when that was done, you could, and the pages were bordered and the guidelines were ruled, then you would take the script in one hand and the pen in the other hand, and the board is on your desk pinned, and you would begin lettering the balloons. You could do the title first if you wanted to. You could save the title for last. But, that was about the only discretion you have. And then after you've done that, you want to get it back to the editorial department as soon as possible so they can send it out to the inker. Sometimes they would have the letterer send the work directly to the inker. Sometimes the inker would come to your house and pick up the work. They got to keep this thing moving all the time. No pages can sit around unworked on.
So, Rick, I have seen pages drawn by British artists where it was penciled in Britain and then inked in Britain and then mailed to New York. and the letterer lettered on a separate piece of paper that's
Right.
glossier, and then every
Yeah.
word balloon was cut out and rubber cemented.
Yes.
And I've also
Yeah.
seen that on an issue of G.I. Joe drawn
Yeah.
in America.
Right.
So besides the British exception, which I can understand because it's going to be lettered in New York and it's too much to FedEx the pencils to New York and
Yeah.
then back to Britain.
Absolutely. That's called an overlay job.
To me, an overlay is when the word balloons are pasted onto clear acetate, which is a separate layer that floats on top of the artwork.
We used to cut. You do the lettering on a piece of vellum that was laid over the original artwork,
Okay.
and then you would separate that from the artwork. It's usually taped on there, and then you would use whiteout on the backs of the balloons. So you flip the page over to the other side, white out the backs of the balloons, and then those balloons would then have to be carefully cut out with a pair of scissors, and then rubber stamped on. And then rubber cemented onto the inked artwork. That was generally how that was done. And then you have to touch it up. You have to touch up the around the, because you can't cut the balloons cannot be cut up, cannot be cut out perfectly around the borders of the balloons. There's always some touch up work that needs to take place, like where it says what happened, the man on the bus says what happened. Maybe that the fence above the balloon might have those lines on the fence might have been partially drawn on a little bit of overlay paper, and that work was done in the production department too. We did a lot of that. Jim Novak and I did a lot of that, but we didn't do paste ups. They had another person at Marvel whose job was to paste up the balloons. And sometimes if that person wasn't available, they would offer I could be offered sometimes paste up work for six. It was like less than lettering a page, but I generally had so much lettering to do. I didn't feel that I could accept paste up work, and paste up work is no fun. It's a messy job. You wind up with little pieces of white paper, in your hair, and a week later you find it on the pillow of your bed, and all that stuff.
Do you remember any jobs where there was a last minute deadline and you had to letter something much faster than normal or overnight?
Oh, sure. Yeah, the people at Marvel worked. They worked into the wee hours of the night very often. One time I went up to Marvel during the Christmas holidays, and there was no heat in the building during the holidays. So there was one other person working there. It was Ernie Chan, and he was inking I was lettering Conan the Barbarian, and he was inking Conan the Barbarian. And we finally dragged our chairs out into the hallway, which was a smaller area, and I think our body heat was what kept us going. But that working, during the night and overnight and over the weekend and everything was just routine. That was normal. These many of the people who work in comics, I can't speak. I know that for a fact that it takes over your life. That becomes your life. Working in comics, everything else. Everything else becomes like secondary to getting the work done. Well, it's interesting to see all of this stuff. I haven't seen it since I did it, actually. Oh, that's by Clem Robbins. Oh, I think maybe, isn't it? Or is that my lettering? That looks like my lettering. All right.
I think that one's from you. This is 139. This is. I think this is later on. This is now in the 90s, and I guess this that you can tell it looks like there's a bit more glossiness on those balloons, and there's a sort.
So you can see the ink. The ink is coming through the paper. So whoever pasted that up didn't put enough whiteout on the back of that.
Or is it that now that it's 30 years later, the rubber cement is breaking down and
absolutely.
the ink is bleeding through? So this is a page. This is a page penciled by a British artist and inked by a British artist, and then mailed to New York where you lettered it.
Yeah, and that the rubber cement does turn brown. Actually, sometimes you see the balloons are they're the color of potato chips. But in a lot of, especially in the early days, the companies and even the artists themselves didn't really, not all of them actually they thought this is like an expendable. They weren't thinking, oh, we want to keep this material in pristine condition if possible, because one of these days we're going to be able to, sell this, and we want to get the maximum amount of money for it. And as you know, for a long time, original comic art was either thrown away, stolen, given away, cut up, all that stuff. But we have Neil Adams to thank for changing that. He made sure that the artist got their work back.
Since we're looking at a page with some type on the bottom here, right? So we're looking at page 1 of issue 39, and underneath the art, there's a paragraph of indicia.
Yeah,
and
we would call it the indicia.
Indicia. Okay,
yeah.
I've been saying it wrong for 20 years.
That's okay.
And, folks, if you're listening, the word is spelled like indicia with a C. And so here's this like 6-point font. And it's the legalese, right? Marvel's address and second-class postage and Hasbro and Postmaster and all rights reserved. Did you do this? I know you wouldn't do this particular task when lettering this issue. Had you done this kind of thing and all the text, all the type for the bullpen bulletins page when you started at Marvel?
No, that was done. They had a typesetter at Marvel, and he had his own little room with these giant machines, and he was the person that did all of that. And then it was printed out on, not on a piece of paper, but kind of a glossy paper. And then there was somebody else whose job it was to paste that onto the page. And when I was there, Mori Kuramoto was pasting things like that down on the pages, and they also had letter columns and things like that, where these big pieces of white paper with all this tiny little type had to be pasted on using rubber cement, and it had to be, squared on the paper, and you'd use your T-square to make sure that the type was, horizontal, and it was all done by hand.
I was also thinking about sort of lettering and what can go wrong is, I guess, for lettering specifically, the most, I guess, egregious error could be a spelling mistake. So there's probably two things that can happen. Like you're spotting a spelling mistake in the script and thinking, do I need to fix that? And then coming up with your own.
I fixed obvious mistakes. If it was a spelling error, I'd fix it. And once in a while, I would see something in the book that I thought I got to call them up about this. One time they were doing a book about the Irish Republican Army, and it was during a time in which the Irish Republican Army was actually active and blowing things up and whatnot. And I called up the editor. I stopped working on the book, and I called up the editor, and I said, hey, I don't think this is such a great idea, And he said, Rick, don't worry about it. Let us worry about that. We'll take care of that. And then a week or two later, after the book came out and I was going up to Marvel Comics, everybody in the office was standing out on the street. And I said, what are you doing? And they said, well, we had a bomb threat, called in here by the, Irish Republican Army. And, I thought, I tried to tell you, But
jumping back to this page that we're looking at, right? We're still looking at page 1 of issue 39.
139.
So the second word balloon, Cobra Commander is saying, I merely offered to make him a deal, and deal is bold.
Yeah.
Right. So there are a lot of
that was indicated. That was indicated by all capital letters in the script.
Okay.
It wasn't up to the letterer to decide which words were bold. I mean, if you're the writer of the book and you're also the letterer of the book, you can decide that. But no, the writer, it's a decision that the writer makes, and you have to be faithful. You have to do what the writer wants, not what you think is better.
So you lettered many issues of G.I. Joe, and a book I was also paying attention to at the same time. You lettered many issues of Amazing Spider-Man. You've talked a little bit about what made G.I. Joe G.I. Joe. Is there anything else to say about, was lettering one book over one artist's pencils or from one writer's script? Was it that different from working on another book, particularly?
Yeah.
How?
everything is different, as you know. And some of the stuff you really care about, some of the stuff you can really relate to. I really liked Spider-Man. I enjoyed working on Spider-Man comic book because I could relate to the character. I mean, a lot of it took place in so-called the real world, and GI Joe was tough for me. It was very professionally done. The scripts were great. It was very clear what they wanted. It was easy to follow, and I could do probably work twice as fast. I could finish a GI Joe comic twice as fast, but I didn't all the different characters. I didn't, wasn't into all of these different characters. I didn't really, although I'd been in the army, I didn't really relate to it as maybe the Nam would have been something, which was more realistic. But I just, I didn't understand, it was hard to follow. There was a lot going on in G.I. Joe. And probably if I was more familiar with it or had been more interested in it, I would have enjoyed working on it more. I liked, if I got involved with the characters, I liked working on the book more. I loved, there were a lot of projects that I enjoyed lettering a lot more because of my individual feeling about it. And this is an interesting page that you've got up here. That was one of the. I think that might have been the. I think this might have been the very first page that I wrote and drew cartoons for, as well as lettering. And I'll bet you I took plenty of time to make sure that the lettering was as good as it could be on this page. All the spacing looks very nice. But
Mark, is this from Marvel Age?
Yeah, it was a back cover
Yep.
on Marvel Age when Jim Salicrup took over, and it was probably done after 84. I don't know what the date on this is. Maybe 84, 85, somewhere along in there. And I remember when I did this thinking, wow, this really felt good. I didn't, I felt, really, I felt this was very natural, for me to do this. But I eventually came to realize that my humorous art style is not, it's just not something that they use very much of. I think if I'd started working at Marvel in the early 70s, I could have worked on maybe I would have been one of the artists that wound up doing Howard the Duck or, something like that. But, I didn't get into.
But your art did make a big sort of, mark on the world of Marvel, because essentially every Marvel book was showing your art in the bullpen bulletins at one point or another, wasn't it? So it was probably your art. It was in more of the Marvel comics than almost any other artist for a little while.
Well, I remember once Mark Grunwald, and that's Mark in the blue shirt. He came up to me. He said, "Rick, do you realize you're the most published cartoonist in the world?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, your work is in more comics every week. There are more physical copies of this thing. There are millions of these things coming out every week. In fact, if you cut them out and glued them all together, they would reach halfway to the moon." Or, Mark liked, he was always, thinking of weird things about like different things that other people wouldn't have thought of. But, I always I love the people that I worked with. And I didn't really understand the whole thing with superheroes. I was older. I started at Marvel. I was 30. I didn't even know what Marvel Comics was. I'd never heard of Spider-Man. The day I started working at Marvel, a guy came around to me and said, "Oh, you're the new guy, right?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "What's your name?" I said, "Rick Parker." He said, "Are you any relation to Peter Parker?" I thought, "Nah, who's that?" But I love the people at Marvel, and I thought they were interesting. The characters, the characters that were making the comics were more interesting to me than the characters that they were creating. Because I just wasn't into superheroes. But I was into people, and I loved the people that I work with. And I have the original coloring for this in my house right now, and I look at it all the time. It's some people appear in there more than once, like that's my wife, and there she is again somewhere else in the story. But you were able to have fun, and I loved Marie Severin did a version of this for Friends of Old Marvel magazine, FOOM number 16. Marie Severin did one of those in like 1975 that I saw when I first started working there. I thought, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen. So, she was a big influence on me. And I always felt, Marie Severin is here. So, I mean, I can't be in the wrong place, because I related to her more than I did to, say, somebody, who was more of a traditional Marvel Comics superhero artist. I didn't understand what they were doing. I just didn't get it, Plus, I didn't draw in that style.
This is a good segue. So Marie Severin drew in the quote in the regular Marvel style on some issues of Hulk and Namor, but she also cartooned and she also colored and did a whole bunch of other stuff.
Right.
So can you talk about your cartooning for an image like this, or for every issue of Beavis and Butthead? Who are the artists when you were thinking of cartooning? Who were the artists either that you did know or that you knew of who you were looking towards?
Well, I grew up from the time I was, maybe 2 or 3 years old, with my grandmother reading comic strips to me from the newspaper. And I loved the comic strips. In fact, I was very disappointed when I found out that they weren't based on real people, or that those people that were in those strips that I loved didn't really exist. That was kind of a startling realization to me. And I loved Roy Crane. He was an artist that I just loved. He did a Sunday newspaper strip, and I loved Jack Davis's work, and I loved Mad Magazine's stuff. Will Elder was a huge influence on me when I was a kid, and Joe Orlando, and there was one cartoonist that I really liked, and I wish I could remember his name right now. David Berg, I think, was the guy's name. Do you guys know David Berg's work? It was in Mad. I was influenced by the Mad comic books.
He did the lighter side of, right?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. But anyway, he wasn't the greatest artist, but I really could relate to his work for whatever reason. But I read horror comics when I was a kid, and I read EC comics, and I loved all that stuff, and Wally Wood, and Will Elder. I love their work, even though I didn't know that Will Elder and Wally Wood, I wasn't thinking of them as people who did it. I just love the work. And Mad was a big influence on me. And of course, by the time I got into comics, humor was kind of it had seen its day, and this was the age of the superheroes. And I just, I found myself working at a superhero company. I'm damn lucky that something finally came along that I was appropriate for. I kept waiting and waiting. It was 15 years before they assigned a comic book for me to draw, and that was Beavis and Butthead, and it was right down my alley. But what I always tell people is, do not wait for somebody to assign you something. If there's something that you're good at, if there's something you think you want to do, if there's something you enjoy, go ahead and give yourself permission to go ahead and do it. Don't wait to be invited to do it. Don't wait to be discovered. Don't wait for somebody to pick you. Discover yourself, pick yourself, do what you want to do, and make it as good as you can, and then show it to the right person.
Okay, Rick, we're looking at the cover to Beavis and Butthead issue number 1, which you penciled and inked and lettered. And I have 2 questions. One, what reference were you provided when you were hired as series artist?
They gave you a Bible with pictures of Beavis and Butthead and all of the main supporting characters, and each character, there were a variety of, like, one 11 by 17 page might have Beavis's heads, nothing but Beavis's heads on it, and they would be in all from different angles with different expressions. And the same with Butthead. And for the characters, including Beavis and Butthead, you would get full rotations, and rotations like front view, back view, side view, 3/4 front, 3/4 rear, all that kind of thing. And a lot of when I first started the book, I don't know if I had the Bible or the reference material, but I got it after maybe a few issues. So some of the first issues of Beavis and Butthead, the characters look a little bit off model. That's because it was my version of the character from looking at it somewhere else. But once I got the Bible, the reference material from MTV, a lot of the things were, I hate to tell you this, folks, but they were traced. So, And I actually employed one of the most talented people in college in New York City. The Fashion Institute of Technology was right around the corner from my studio, and I contacted the head of the department. I said, "Do you have any really talented young people there that would like to have a job working in comics?" And they sent me over a very talented young man named Rob Camacho, and Rob became the person whose job it was, after I'd laid out the pages, and to very carefully trace all of the heads of Beavis and Butthead onto the page. We had a little bit more freedom with the bodies. Also had another assistant working with me named George Levine, and at some point, George Levine was drawing the entire issues, and what I was doing was I was lettering them and inking them, and maybe adding things to them that I thought were funny. That was my favorite part of doing this project, was that after you'd told the story that they wanted, you could also, if you thought of something funny, you could add it in the background, or maybe, just, which would give it a slightly different meaning, or just, I had to, you have to find a way of making things that you do enjoyable for yourself, of falling in love with it. And I found out many years later that a friend of mine went up to MTV to audition for a role in Beavis and Butthead Do America, a voiceover role. And they sent him to a room, and when he got to the room, there was another young man there. And the guy and my friend said to him, "Are you here to audition for the movie?" And the guy says, "No, I'm Mike Judge. I'm the creator of Beavis and Butthead." And the guy said, "Oh," he said, "then you must know my friend Rick Parker." And he said, Mike got this look on his face like, that name sounds familiar. And he said, "He drew the comic book." And Mike said, "Oh, I never liked the comic book." And I think it's because, it wasn't his pure vision, but I'm not worried about whether people like the comic book or not. I mean, I made sure that I loved it. And my whole theory is, if you create something, make sure you love it, because otherwise you have no reasonable expectation to think, why should anybody else love it if I don't even love it myself? But I try to make sure that I show people things that I'm happy with, and I hope for the best after that. But
okay, Rick.
Yeah.
So the Beavis and Butthead cartoon, each episode, it was an 11-minute segment, so a half hour was 2 episodes, and half the animation was a story where Beavis and Butthead would be at school, or they'd be outside, or they'd get in some trouble or have an adventure. And then half the footage was them watching music videos on MTV and talking about them. And for the Marvel comic, there were 3 or 4 pages per issue where Beavis and Butthead, as single pages by themselves, are reading a Marvel comic and commenting on it. And a guest artist would draw, like if they're reading an Iron Man comic, on these 3 or so pages, a guest artist would draw some sort of inset artwork of like Iron Man flying around, so that we can see the adventure that this character is having, that Beavis and Butthead are commenting on.
Right.
So was that artwork done directly on your artboard for those pages that you were sharing space with other artists? And it was a different artist every issue and a different character or Marvel comic each issue. Yeah. How did you handle those pages?
Well, first of all, I hated that they were doing that. I thought, this is out of character with the rest of the book. But, it was...
Because they don't read?
No, it's just because it had these superheroes in there. I was thinking, God, I can't get away from these superheroes. But it turned out to be a very popular, part of the book, and a lot of people like those things. But for the most part, the artists, including John Romita, who I think did one of the first pages, and I remember he had a drawing of Mary Jane wearing, sexy underwear and posed on a couch or something, and that was, I got to keep that page, which was great because, it was a page of Beavis and Butthead, and, I was the person that they returned to the Beavis and Butthead pages too. So I got to keep his page, and I got to keep all of the other pages from all the other artists too. But some of them were smart. They did the artwork on a separate piece of paper, and all I ever saw was a photostat of the page. So, but there were many pages that were all original art. and I got to keep those. And if I'd been truly, if I'd thought about it a little bit more, I might have thought, you know what, Rick, be a good guy, return those original art pages to the artist that did them, like Tom Morgan did a page, and Tom was kind of a friend of mine, and I didn't see him all the time, but I mean, I could have easily, said, Tom, this is 99% of this page is by you. You should have this. But no, I coveted those pages, and I still have some of them. I probably have sold some of them. I know I sold the John Romita page right away because once Beavis and Butthead comic got canceled, I had no work, and I didn't know what to do with myself, and I had 2 little kids living at home, so I was scrambling to try to make, to try to see what I had that I could sell to somebody so I could make some money to, pay my bills. And that's a very bad situation to be in, folks. Don't ever let that happen to you. But anyway, yeah, that was not my favorite part of the book, but it was very popular with the fans. And one of the things that people don't know that I'd like to say is that I have over 500. I think I have 3 giant boxes of letters that were written to Marvel Comics and Rick Parker and Beavis and Butthead. And some of these people that wrote these letters, I think they thought that Beavis and Butthead worked at Marvel, and they were 2 guys that were going to, it was amazing. These letters would make a great book, just because every one of these letters, had the kids, both boys and girls, versions of the drawings of the characters, and some of them were really good. And always, from time to time, I'll take a letter out of that box and look up to see if that person is still alive somewhere, out in the United States, and to try to find out what happened to them. Did they become artists, or what happened? But I have to suppress my desire to do stuff like that, which I'm interested in. But it cuts into your work time. I still got the letters though, and I don't have the rights to publish them, unfortunately. But that would make a great book.
I was gonna bring us to a staggering halt on this phase and bring us back to one of one of Rick's most famous lettering jobs, or lack of lettering jobs, which was issue 21. I've put it on the screen, and the original box there for the credits is missing a certain name, which is the letterer of the issue. Right. So can you tell us about working on this famous silent issue?
Yeah, this is an instance in which I butted heads with editor Larry Hama, who was obviously the writer and the breakdown artist and the main force behind this comic. I heard that the book was going to be, there was not going to be any lettering on any of the pages, but I wanted to know if I was going to I still have to border the pages. I still have to put the numbers on the pages. I still have to handle the pages. Am I going to get paid? He looked at me like I was crazy. No, you're not going to get paid, and that bothered me, so I did have to letter the first page, and I wanted to do a good job, but I thought, my protest will be that I will leave my own name off of the credits. I'm sure that really gave Larry something to chew on for the rest of his life. But I still worked on the next issue. I mean, I didn't. That was not the only. Yeah, somebody gave me a copy of that design recently, so I finally added my name to it. That was fun. But Larry is a really interesting guy. Very complicated guy.
So this splash page, the silent interlude in the top left-hand corner, is that you that would have created that logo?
I lettered. I lettered it, and it's it's based on a five parallel horizontal lines, and that was the method that was shown to me by Danny Crespi, who was the assistant production manager and had done lots of great lettering, lots of cover lettering for books. And it's just kind of a simple, no nonsense, hard to object. Nobody ever objects to this. So, and also I think the Stan Lee Presents looks like it was lettered by hand too, because the Presents part looks like my lettering. Probably lettered that by hand. But yeah.
What are the 5 parallel lines?
Well, across the top, and then the second line down would be the bottom of that S, and that goes across, and you see how that is even with the top of the E, and then the middle part of the S is even with the top of the E, with the middle part of the S, and the bottom part of the S is even with the L and the bottom part of the E. So those lines just enable you to, to block out the horizontal section. Then all you're left with is the vertical section, and then it becomes a matter of how wide are these letters going to be. Now, looking at this now, it looks like that S is a little bit wider than I would like to, have it. And it looks like the E might be a little bit too close to that N. So, and the left side of the T looks like it's a little bit smaller than the right side of the T. So it doesn't look like Rick Parker put a lot of effort and thought into making that as good as it can possibly be. But
I just want to respond.
Yeah, please.
I believe this, and also Larry Hama said this at a convention panel 3 weeks ago. Not that the only alternative here is computer lettering, because I guess an alternative could be you doing it differently or someone else doing it. But the sort of modern major alternative is most comics are lettered by computer. And I find, though I appreciate how neat and crisp and uniform everything is in computer lettering, it's too neat and uniform for me. And it feels a little dead, feels a little cold. And so when I look at these two words, silent interlude, and I see a lot of very small inconsistencies, I don't see that as a problem. I see it as a warmth, like hearing crackle when I listen to a vinyl record.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, and I believe that human beings like looking at things that were done by other human beings. I think there comes a time in technology when technology, maybe goes a little bit too far. I mean, some of the things that you see in films these days, while some people might be thrilled to see it, if I look at something and I can't figure out how it was done, or if I feel that they're just trying to bowl me over with the special effects, I don't like that. But if I had to do this page over again, I would have had silent interlude. I wouldn't have had a black line around that. I would have had maybe a line which is a little bit darker in tone than the blue sky. So you could still read silent interlude, but it would be almost like it wasn't there. See, that would have been like, I thought about this a little bit more. And down here on the rather than just have a rectangle that is kind of stuck down there in the lower right-hand corner, wouldn't it have been fun to write the different creative people's names on these rocks? Larry Hama's name could have been carved into that big rock over there on the left. And, the Steve Lealoa's name might have been written along the edge in the green space of those rocks. See, I think the fans would have liked that. And I think it would have been fun to do. But, this was during a time when I just wanted to just knock out the page and move on to the next one. So, I wasn't.
Do believe, Rick, I do believe you did that treatment for the first page of issue 92, which is a Mark Bright and Randy Emberlin splash page where we're looking up some rocks at I think a train. Mark, it's okay if you don't have that page handy. So, so you did do something like that elsewhere.
Yeah, good. I'm glad I wasn't just a complete hack.
Well, this issue 21, Silent Interlude, there was a tremendous deadline crunch. So if you did it the simple way, the easy way, I think that was probably the unspoken or spoken directive.
Yeah, and there's also a second another page here that does have some lettering as well as Destro's looking on his computer screen, and we figured out that must have been using some technology to kind of reverse the lettering, reverse the original black lettering, so it's white on a black background, and then that was stuck in on top of the original art.
I can't tell. I can't tell by looking at it whether that was hand lettered or whether it is a computer font. But it was certainly black on a piece of white paper, and then it was photographed, and they made a negative of it. And it looks pretty good, actually. I don't remember doing that. I don't think I would have done. I don't think that's my work.
Okay. And
you see how it's got a little, the O on of is smaller. I wouldn't have done that. I would have had I probably would have had all capital letters.
Okay. And one of the stories about sort of the reason that this issue came about and the late, the sort of the rushed nature of it having to be created was the way that I think Larry tells it is that in Denny O'Neil's chaotic office, there'd be piles of paper everywhere and things like this, and that somehow either the original issue was lost or just deadlines just got a little bit mixed up. Are you able to kind of talk to your recollection of sort of Denny's editing style or his office?
Well, no is the quick answer. I hardly left my desk when I was at Marvel, because if I wasn't doing lettering corrections, I was probably working on my own freelance work. So getting up and walking around, unless I had a very good reason to go into Denny O'Neil's office, I probably didn't go in there. I remember going in there once, and Denny O'Neil was he just finished a telephone conversation, and he was really upset. And I said, "What's the matter?" And he says, "I'll never use that son of a gun again." That wasn't his exact words. I said, who was it? And maybe I shouldn't name the artist, but whoever it was had promised that he would have something ready for Denny on a certain date, and he didn't do it. He blew the deadline, and that left Denny, in a very awkward position. But, Denny was a really smart guy, and he was a really good editor, and he knew what he was doing. And looking at these pages right here, just 40 years later, I will say, what great layouts! Thank you, Larry. What interesting, the expression on that character's face in the bottom panel. I mean, the inking on this close up of the character. That's Steve Lealoa all the way. This was a great book, and they had some really talented people, working on it. And it's pure Larry Hama. A few years ago, like maybe 7 or 8 years ago, I realized Larry. I always wanted to. I'm going to contact Larry. I'm going to ask him to write something for me to illustrate. So I wrote to Larry, and he was flying back on a plane from. I think he was working in Hollywood at the time. And he wrote us 8-page story for me to illustrate. And I did it, and I sent him the pencil pages, and he kind of, I won't say completely redid all of the layouts on the pages, but he really, I wanted doing the layouts the way he wanted them, and it wound up being a great story. But Larry's layouts are just really great. I mean, this page is just so much fun to look at. You look at the top, it's your eye will linger on the intricacies of that. Whatever that piece of equipment is there. And, the next thing, there's lots of interesting things to look at. And then you got this giant face looking at you, and then the type, and then the guy contemplating. It's just an interesting page. And Larry did that for so many books. So many of the artists that worked with Larry became better artists because they were working with Larry or for Larry, and Larry taught them a lot. And I'm sure that you'll eventually hear that from other people as well.
Rick, what is this story that you and Hama collaborated on?
Oh, yeah. Well, it was a story about a little girl. Yeah, there he is. That was the day I asked him if he would write I asked him if he would write the foreword to this graphic novel that I was working on about getting drafted. And he agreed to do it right on the spot. And he wound up giving me a nice blurb for the book because he and I were both stationed at Fort Jackson at one time. And he said if you were ever in the Army, this will bring back a lot of memories for you. And but anyway, that book was a story of a little girl who was I guess it was about child molestation or something. Anyway, she was picked up by this creep. And, he was trying to lure her back to his house. And, he didn't realize that she could metamorphosize, if that's the right word, into a multi-armed tentacled monster. And so she wound up with the upper hand over this guy. I don't know where a story like that would ever be published, but I spent weeks on it. And I showed it to him, and you don't get a lot. I never got a lot of like, oh wow, that's great, Rick. You don't get that kind of stuff from Larry. I guess if he doesn't laugh out loud and say this sucks, you should be happy. but no, it was one of the things that I really feel like I felt good about, that I'd been able to do a story for Larry, because he's such a good writer and
Rick,
and artist too.
Is it possible that that was for paper cuts? Because I feel like in a catalog 6 years ago, I saw a solicitation for a revival of one of the EC comics. It was like Tales from the Crypt. And Larry's name was listed. It was going to be a 3-issue miniseries. And they were never published. And I asked him about it like 6 months later, and he shrugged his shoulders.
I'm sure it was never published, or I would have known about it.
Okay.
And I don't think Paper Cuts would have been able to do it, because it was not, there's not for kids. I would say I'm not too sure it was for adults, to be honest with you. But the subject matter was really was for adults only.
Do you remember? Was this just the two of you, or was there an editor involved?
Nope, just the two of us. And at one point, he told me that there was somebody that wanted to publish it, and I don't remember whether it was Paper Cuts or who it was, and they were only going to pay $50 a page. And I thought, what I realized later is I should have said, well, do you want to do that? And it would have been $400, and I would have been happy for him to have the $400. But at the time, I think I was holding out for maybe I'm going to get two other writers to write stories for me to illustrate, and then I'll have like 20-something pages, and I could maybe get that published as a book. And I wanted people to be, adequately compensated, because I did not pay Larry to write this story. He did it out of the, goodness of his heart. And, it's still out there. Maybe one day somebody may be interested in it.
So you have the originals. You have all
the
artwork.
I did all the artwork, the lettering, and the coloring, and it's finished, and it's never been seen, and it'll probably eventually everything gets seen. But I mean, I'm happy with the work I did. I thought, when you're working for Larry, there's something about the guy that just brings out the best in you. You want to do your very best for him to, you want him, you want to please the guy. I think you want to get him to say he likes it. It's not easy. It's not easy to do. My impression is that Larry doesn't shower people with praise, but he'll let you know if it's not good enough.
I found that that page that I think you were referring to, Tim, unless you were thinking of a different one. This was from the issue 92, where the credits have been lettered on the struts of this railway line that's sort of traversing a ravine.
Yeah. Right. That's good. I like that. Although the Larry Hama part of the H looks like it's off of the whatever that piece of wood is. But anyway, I think it's more interesting. I think it's interesting, and they blend in better. It doesn't like, it's not just something stuck on the bottom of the page. I mean, that bridge supporting structure is actually nice. It'd be a shame to cover it up. But I tried to do that with Spider-Man too. When Todd McFarlane took over Spider-Man, he wanted he told me, don't do just your average lettering job, Rick. I want you to do something special on Spider-Man that I'm writing and drawing. So I said, okay, sure. And then we had spidery looking lettering, and where the letters, some of the parts of the letters look like the legs of a spider, and it was still, the main thing is it's fine is if it's readable.
And in those first 5 issues, you lettered the word doom many, many, many times. I don't mean the name, everyone. I mean the sound effect, because it's right. Like Spider-Man's been poisoned, or there are these drums as someone is approaching. Yeah. Mark, is this the time when we're going to ask Rick about no longer lettering G.I. Joe?
Yeah, I mean, so we talked about that you getting on with Larry, admiring him. Maybe there's a time where there was a little bit more of a falling out, and the question that we mentioned before, which was explain the gap in your CV. So there's this point at which you stop lettering G.I. Joe for a few years before coming back, and there's a story there.
Right. Well, was GI Joe was just one of the books that I was lettering. I was in high demand, and that's a great situation to be in because you can make as much money as long as you're willing to work 24 hours a day. The work is available to you. And I was lettering a book called King Conan, and Larry was the editor of that book. And there was a scene that was drawn by Val Merrick, I believe, drew the book. And there's a scene in which Conan is swimming in a river, and then there's a character which is sitting up, and Conan is one of the characters is sitting on the river, and I guess the other character is swimming in the river. And they were just talking. This balloon, it said, "The sun shines on all else but shines on Poitin. Now you've got me spouting." It sounded like, how could he hear him? He's so far away. So I wrote on the edge of the paper, not intending for this to get printed into the book, is like, my God, this guy's got good hearing, eh? And then I think it was the assistant editor wrote, "What? I don't understand." Or maybe that was the inker that wrote that. I don't know who wrote that, but I certainly didn't intend that to be, go out there. I didn't want to make anybody look bad or Marvel look stupid or anything. But the book got printed. It was like 350,000 issues. And Larry called me into his office. He said, "Did you do this?" I said, "I was raised to, George Washington chopped down the cherry tree." I said, "Yes. I do not never tell a lie." I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well?" I'm thinking, "Well, what?" He says, "Well, don't you have any remorse?" And I actually did not know what the word remorse meant. So I said, "No." And he said, "Okay, that's it. You're off the book." And that's, I walked out of his office. I mean, he didn't hit me or throw anything at me or shoot me with a Uzi or, cut me in half with a samurai sword. So I guess I'm pretty lucky, But, I was off the book. And I was not only was I off Conan the King, but I was off everything that Larry was editing that I was working on, including writing G.I. Joe. And that hurt, because I liked working on that book. It was interesting and a moneymaker. But a couple of years went by, and I was still outside his office, and he came out with another comic for me to letter, and he walked over to me and he put the book down on my desk, and he says, "Well, I guess you've suffered enough." And I thought, I didn't say this to him, but I was thinking, wow, I haven't suffered at all. I had plenty of other work. But that's my Larry story, and I'd like to say that I don't think that any problem that Larry has with a creative person. I mean, it wasn't like if I saw him, outside a movie theater or something, he would have shunned me or anything. I don't think it completely. I don't think it would have ruined my personal relationship with him, but it certainly didn't help my professional relationship with him, especially. But I have a great deal of respect for Larry, and I think he's one of the most knowledgeable people in the field about comics, and I think that his track record, proves that.
You mentioned he didn't shoot you with an Uzi or chop you up with a samurai sword. I'm just thinking about some of the legends around Larry and what was in his office. Did he have the sort of idiosyncratic things sort of hanging about in his office?
Well, I was right outside of his office, and I used to see people coming and going from there. And occasionally, some artists would go in there, and I think one time I heard him say, "This sucks," and then the person came out kind of with their tail tucked between their legs. He didn't mince words, and he was totally honest, and he called it like it was, and he took his job very seriously, and he cared about the work. And I'm not saying that the other editors didn't care about the work either, but I think that if people went in to work for Larry, they knew that they'd better do the very best that they were capable of, because I don't think he would have tolerated anything less, and he wouldn't have had any problem about telling you, this is terrible. But anyway.
I was only going to say that I guess there's a happier end to that Larry Hama's story in terms of the friendship that you sort of built, after the, I guess, falling out in terms of that lettering. Can you tell us a little bit more about how your relationship with Larry has developed over the years?
Well, I mean, I can't say that Larry and I are best friends or anything, but I consider him a friend, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for Larry, and I like him personally as a human being. He's got a great deal of integrity, and I respect that in people. And when my wife was in the hospital giving birth to our second child, there was a blizzard, I think, in New York, and I was isolated and alone up there with my 2-year-old son, and I thought, man, I could really use some company right now. I'd like to call somebody up on the phone and invite him to come over here and hang out for a while. I thought, you know what, I'm going to call Larry. And Larry, to his credit, came over. Maybe an hour later, he was over at my house and he brought food, and we had a nice meal together. And I will always, appreciate that. I don't remember what we talked about. I don't think we talked about I have no remorse or anything like that. But anyway, I love the people at Marvel. I have to say, I had a great relationship with so many people there. It's so, life is, people die. It's sad to me to think about all of the people that are no longer here that I would have liked to have, read my book. I think that I would not have been able to do the book that I did without the help of many, many people at Marvel who I worked with and who I came in contact with and who taught me things over the years. And many of those people aren't around anymore, but some of them are, and that's very nice. I'm still friends with people today who I met 50 years ago when I came to New York, and it's great, to finally come out with something of my own that I'm proud of to show people.
Mm-hmm. While we're just talking about the birth of your second child, I heard you say that Larry named a G.I. Joe character after your child. What was?
Yes, that's right. Well, he called me up not long after Grayson was born, and he said, "What's your son's name?" And I said, "It's James Grayson Parker." And he said, "Would it be all right with you if I named one of the G.I. Joe characters after him?" And I said, "Sure, I think that would be great." And I've always wanted to see if it's a plastic toy in a cellophane wrapper, or if anybody knows about this James Grayson Parker character, I would love to know where I can get a copy. My son would love it too. He collects stuff, and I'm sure he would like to have a copy of that too. I don't know if maybe somebody watching this can let me know about that.
Hama named many G.I. Joe characters after people he knew. A couple were named after Marvel folks. Mm-hmm. In a few cases over the years, someone at Hasbro picked the name themselves. And I think in a couple cases, someone at Hasbro may have taken a name that Larry had picked, and then they changed it because they were the next sort of editorial or art direction step in the process.
Right.
Mark, is this where you put an image on screen? Were you able to find something?
I'm not sure if I can find it, but I'm sure someone in the comments when this eventually goes out will point us in the right direction if we don't figure out before.
This may be a character who has a walk-on appearance in an issue and is not made into a toy. It may be one of these cases where the name didn't make the final cut.
That would be great. I mean, I'd love to see that. That would mean a lot to Grayson, I think.
Rick, can you talk about when you stopped working at Marvel? What were those circumstances? Because I figure if you are a fast, good letterer, you're just going to stay busy, right?
No, unfortunately, it was a bit of a shock. I'd worked at Marvel for about 18 years, and the last thing I did for them was I spent 2.5 years doing Beavis and Butthead comic book. And all of a sudden, the company was bought by a corporate raider. He wanted to cancel all licensed material. That included Barbie, which my wife was writing. I had 2 young kids, and suddenly I found myself going from making a good living to making zero money, and it was a bit of a panic. It was during that period of time when I sold a lot of the original artwork for Beavis and Butthead comic book because I just didn't know what to do. And it was rough. It was really rough. I didn't know what to do. And lettering had been kind of taken over by people using computers, and that wasn't something which particularly interested me. So I thought, well, I've been doing artwork. Now I have a lot of published work. I'll try to become an illustrator. So I called up a good friend of mine, very successful illustrator, Gary Hallgren. You probably have heard of him. And Gary said, Rick, you've picked the absolute worst time to go into illustration. I thought, I have? I mean, why is that? And he said, because, the computers have taken over a lot of illustration jobs that people, formerly where companies would have to hire an actual artist to make something, on paper. Now that they could have people who were in-house who knew how to use certain computer programs just generate whatever, image that they needed. And that was a bit of a shock. I did get I sent out a whole bunch of cards to people. I had color postcards printed up with lots of images and stuff on there. And I got a response from one art rep, and she said, Rick, I really like your work, but I'm not getting enough, I don't have enough work to keep the people busy that I have right now. So I gradually became interested in teaching, and I thought I was going to become like a high school teacher or something like that. So I have a master's degree, so I didn't really have to do too much other than get certified. But the job that I was offered eventually was in another town that was about an hour drive or something away from where I was living. So I didn't want to do that. And plus, I didn't really think that I could get along with the administration. I'm not good at doing what other people want me to do. I don't like people telling me what to do. Except when I was a cab driver, people told you, we go to 38th and Madison. I would do that. But sometimes I say, I don't know how to get there. You're going to have to show me. That was in the first week or so. I had to ask a lot of people. I was probably driving a cab for a couple of days, maybe a week before I knew how to get to someplace by myself. But I was asked to come talk to my son was in kindergarten at the time, and they said we like for people that are doing unusual things to come and talk to our students about their work. So I went and talked to the 5-year-old kids about comics and cartooning, and I discovered I had an inner person that I did not know was part of me that was part carnival barker, part evangelist preacher, and he liked his religion was art, and he loved talking about that. And so they asked me, "Wow, you were really good, Rick. Would you consider working in the after-school program?" And so I wound up for 10 years. I worked in the after-school program in New Jersey, going around to schools and teaching cartooning for an hour to a class with 20 or 30 people in it. And I loved it. And I became a much better cartoonist and a much better artist as a result of doing that, which was a surprise. Because, if you have to explain something to somebody, you have to think about it in a way that you never thought about it before. And I realized that I have relied wholly on whatever innate talent that I have, plus my intuition. I think I've got good artistic intuition. I'm a creative person, and I could draw. But there's a lot more to know than that. There are reasons why some things work and some things don't work. And anyway, I love teaching, and I had private students. I started taking private students in my home, and some of those people became they were incredibly gifted kids who have gone on that are going to have brilliant careers in the arts. And it was a great experience. I loved it. I love teaching.
Describing how you didn't necessarily respond that well to people telling you what to do, and sort of reading this and sort of looking at the rest of your career where you you think about, I guess I think of you as a kind of like in that counterculture cartoonist sort of world of the likes of Robert Crumb and stuff, the almost antithesis of military kind of boot shining. How do you think those two things come to converge and work? Work?
I don't. Robert Crumb is very different from me. I mean, he's much freer than much more free than I am. I'm a pretty conventional person, actually. I believe in playing by the rules, and I'm I did what they told me when I was in the Army. I mean, I didn't have any problem. I was going to get through that the best I can, and I thought it would be better not to try to buck the system. But I just preferred it in real life. Prefer to be in a situation where I can do whatever I want to do, which is one of the reasons why I love working on Drafted, because I realize the only person I've got to please here is myself. I always spend a lot of time worrying about what other people were going to think, particularly if somebody has written a story and you're illustrating it. It's like, I wonder what they're going to think of this. Am I doing this? Is this what they wanted? Or, you don't, I spend a lot of time worrying about what other people think. But it wasn't a problem that I had with this book. I just tried to, please myself and hope for the best.
Before we get to your new graphic novel, Drafted, I want to ask in your author bio on the back flap of Drafted, I am reminded that you were the artist of Paper Cut's Mad Magazine style graphic novel parodies, including Harry Potty and the Deathly Boring,
yeah, that was fun.
Diary of a Stinky Dead Kid, and Ghoul
Lunatic sequences for the revival of Tales from the Crypt.
For Tales from the Crypt. So you were doing other work before you started Drafted. So in the years after Marvel, you were teaching and freelancing or trying to freelance. Can you talk about those graphic novels for Paper Cuts and sort of how long that was, what it was like?
Yeah, I also like to tell you that in 2004, which was a number of years after I stopped working for Marvel in '96, and in 2004, which is 8 years later, Dwayne McDuffie and Matt Wayne contacted me, and they had a book that they had written called The Road to Hell, and they were hoping to get this book made into a movie, and they wanted a comic book graphic novel made of it. And so that was really the first graphic novel that I ever did, and it was never published, but it was 168 pages. It took me about a year and a half of my time, and I think I made about $3,000, working on that. But it's, I think that, to be realistic, I think artists need to think about, the amount of time that they're spending on something. But I've always liked to I don't like to rush something. I want to take my time to do a good job on it. But I also, I was a big fan of EC Comics when I was a kid. So when Jim Salicrup called me in 2007 and said, we would like you to do the Ghoul Lunatic sequences for the revival of Tales from the Crypt, starring the Crypt Keeper, the Vault Keeper, and the Old Witch, I thought, great, perfect. I understand this. I remember being freaked out by these people when I was a kid. That guy with the long gray hair down to his shoulders. I mean, there was nothing like that in 1955 that I knew about it. And he was talking directly to the reader. He's like looking at you. And, I thought, wow, that's great. So here, finally, somebody's offered me something which is kind of right down my alley. Plus, I was a huge fan of horror comics when I was a kid. I went to see every horror movie that came to my town, Savannah, Georgia, from 1952 till about 1962. So I saw all these things. Anyway, it was great. I kind of got back into comics through those parody books that Jim and Stefan wrote. And that was a lot of fun. And I learned a lot, from that experience.
How many? These were graphic novels, and you did several of them, and you
drew them. I did like 7 of them actually, and we did Harry Potty and the Deathly Boring. We did Breaking Dawn, a parody of Breaking Dawn called Breaking Down. We did a parody of Percy Jackson and the Olympians. Ours was called Percy Jackson and the Ovo-Lacto-Vegetarians. They were written by Stefan Petruka, who's a really funny guy, very good writer. And they were 50 pages. I did the penciling, the inking, the lettering, the coloring. And, I worried a lot about whether is this what he wants? Because I didn't get a lot of the references. There are a lot of cultural references. Other people write, things that I don't necessarily know about. I stopped watching television, when I was about 15 or 16 years old. I don't think I ever watched TV again. I mean, so anything modern, I don't know what it is. I didn't get it, but they were okay with it. We did a parody of The Walking Dead, which I thought I was perfect for that, because I draw really good, ghouls, monsters, scary stuff. I'm really good at that. I was Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine was a big influence on my life in 1957, 1958. And I used to draw all of the monsters and things, and I put the drawings up on my wall in my room. And one day there was a knock on the door, and somebody went to the door, and Ricky, there's a bunch of boys here wanting to see you. And I thought, great, finally I'm going to be accepted into the boys club, But all they really wanted to see was my artwork on the wall, because somebody had told them about it in school, and they were on their way somewhere, and they were passing my house, so they stopped in for 5 minutes to look at the stuff. Well, my heart was broken when they all left, and I was left there with my work. But I realize now that's where I'm going to be. I'm going to be, in the end, I'll be there with my funny drawings, and except I do have a wife and 2 wonderful children that I'm very happy about.
So I just saw a bunch of your original artwork for Drafted.
Yes, thank you for coming to that show.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me. So viewers and listeners, University of Massachusetts Lowell campus, UMass Lowell, has a small gallery, and I don't know, by the time in November and December of 2024, has a gallery show of original artwork with, as you can see here, a few blow-ups of full color panels of Rick's art and process from Drafted. And I went to see the show, and he gave a talk, and it was great. And some of the pages had ink stamps on the bottom or side margin with a date, like a librarian would stamp into the back of a library book with the month, date, and year. Yeah. And some of those ink stamps on the original artwork were like 2017. So 2 questions. How did you start? How did Drafted come to be in the beginning? And also, I'm asking this jokingly, why did it take so long?
Well, there's a couple of theories, and one theory is that the amount of work expands to fill the amount of time that you have to do it. And these days, if I talk to anybody that's working on a graphic novel or something, I said, give yourself a reasonable expectation to actually push a little bit harder. If you think you can do a page a day, try for 2 pages a day, and that way the book it won't take you 7 years to do the book. But in about 2013, the phone stopped ringing. People stopped calling me. The last paying job I did was I lettered 28 issues of American Gods by Neil Gaiman and P. Craig Russell. And after that, I wasn't getting any more work. So I thought, well, if the world doesn't have any use for you, you'd better come up with some use for yourself. So I'd been thinking that I wanted to, do something autobiographical. I'd worked with Harvey Pekar, and I liked that kind of stuff. I feel like, okay, I get it. Comics can be about anything you want. They don't have to be about superheroes. So I thought, wow, but drawing a graphic novel, man, that is a lot of work. I think what I'll do is I'll just start writing about my life. So I got a blog, and I started writing about my life. And I wrote for 2014 and into 2015, and the stories just came pouring out. And I realized that I really love writing, because I was feeling things that I'd never felt before when I was just drawing. And occasionally, you'll do a drawing of something funny and it will make you laugh out loud. That probably happened to me once in 70 years, maybe twice. But when I started writing about my life and the people in my life and the people that I'd known, all of a sudden, I'm starting to, get a lump in my throat. Sometimes these things were very moving. And it was great to be able to look back on your life. As you get toward the end of your life, look back on your life, and it helps you figure out, well, what was my life all about? What was I doing here? What did I do with my time? And then after about a year or so, I ran out of things to write about. And I thought, damn, now I guess I'm going to have to draw some of this stuff. And I looked at the 150 stories, and a lot of them were about the Army. So I said, well, every good story needs a beginning, middle, and an end. I know when this thing started. It started when I got drafted, and I know when it ended. It ended when I got out. In the middle is everything that happened in between, and it covered a 3-year period. So I thought, I'm going to do a story about that. There were so many things that happened when I was in the Army that I remember thinking as a 20-year-old, wow, this is unbelievable. I'm going to have to tell somebody about this one day. I'm going to have to write a book about it. Little did I know it was going to take me 50 years and become be a big comic book. But many of the things that happened in this book were stories that I told to my parents, I told to my friends, I told to different people over the years. And I've told some of these stories so many times that they were so ingrained in my subconscious mind that it seemed natural. Now it's time to tell everybody else about them. And after I started, I realized this isn't just my story. This is a story of about 250,000 other guys like me who got, yanked up out of whatever life they had and put into this army. And we all kind of went through certain things together. And those guys, many of whom aren't here anymore, but their stories, deserve to be told. Fortunately, and very happily, I discovered there are a handful of people that I still am in contact with who went through this with me, and they got the book, and some of them are in the book. And so it was really great, to be able to show them the book. Most recently, a friend of mine showed it to her 103-year-old father, who was a veteran of World War II. And she was nice enough to make a videotape of this guy reading my book and laughing. And it brought back so many memories. And he started talking about, what his experiences were in the Army. And I thought, wow, it just doesn't get any greater than this. You connected with somebody who was a World War II vet. And he enjoyed, he was getting a kick out of it. He was laughing. And so, I thought that, that's great. That was a big thrill. But once I started going on this, I discovered that there were all of these things that I forgot, that I thought I forgot, that I remember. And I started thinking that all of the things that have ever happened to us, all of the experiences that we've ever had, they're all still inside our head. We just have to start moving the furniture away from those rooms that stuff's stored in. It's all still there. And I liked going back and telling a story about something that happened in 1968. Because I forgot about the real world that I was living in, and I went back, and those people were there with me again. Those people were alive. It was hard to do the part with my mother and father. I will tell you that. That was tough. That was really tough. But aside from that, it was, I won't say fun, but I will say that I enjoyed the feeling like I was 20 years old again. That was a thing that I hadn't expected. I forgot that I'm an old guy, sitting at a drawing table, hunched over, drawing, for hours at a time. So I feel like I'm 20 years old again. I can jump up there and climb over the wall of that building or whatever. But I'm starting to come back to reality now. But it was, when you start a project like this, once it gets going, it takes on a life of its own, an energy in its own. And I experienced some things on this long 250-page book that I never experienced in my life. And that is, at one point, I knew I was sitting in the chair here at my drawing table, and my hand was moving. I could see my hand moving on that page, and I was drawing pictures, and those pictures were coming out a lot better than I thought that I could ever do. And it was almost like somebody else was doing the work, and I was just sitting there, and the work was being done by somebody else. I told a friend of mine about that, and he said, "Rick, that was God working through you." But I don't know whether it was God working through me or not. But you just, you get in the groove or something. I did practice my figure drawing for well over a year before I started on this, because I was never comfortable with my figure drawing. And I realized, and I produced thousands of drawings of male figures, mostly male figures. This book's 99% men, and this boys and men in uniforms. But I just drew the figure over and over again compulsively until I felt completely, comfortable with my figure drawing. I did come to a point where I said, well, look, okay, you're not going to be, Wally Wood, okay? But that's okay. As long as you can tell the story, because I do believe that in comics, it's a storytelling medium. And the story is very important. You got to have a great story, and you got to tell it well. And I think the readers will cut me a lot of slack, and I think they have, because if you start looking at my figure drawing or looking at the creases on somebody's uniform, you say, well, that's if I had showed it to somebody at Marvel, they might have said, it's not quite right. But it's good enough to tell the story. And so if you're going someplace great, and the trip is going to be wonderful, people will forget that they're not driving there in a Rolls Royce or a Cadillac or BMW. They're going there in a 64 Plymouth, but they're getting there and they're having a good time. And that's what I eventually had to settle for, that I can tell the story and people can follow the story. And hopefully some of the things that are happening that they're seeing and reading about they'll care about me, they'll care about the other characters, and before they know it, they're kind of relating to the characters, they're identifying, they want to know what's going to happen next. And, having worked on the Spider-Man strip for Stan Lee, I think I learned how to keep people, hanging on until the next day to see what happens. I try to have a little bit, not a cliffhanger, but I try to make the book a page turner. And, there's got to be a little reward there at the end. And, I'd like to think that, I learned a lot about what I'm doing. And if I am lucky enough to live long enough to finish the next book, that it'll be even better. It'll be different anyway.
Mark, can you put up that image that I sent you of faces in profile? Do you have that? Okay. Rick, this is a photo I took from your gallery show at UMass Lowell. If it looks a little bit hazy, it's because there's a piece of plexiglass.
No, that's great. That's great.
And what I see are a bunch of male heads in profile. It's all the same head stamped over and over and over and over and printed in very light blue onto your Bristol. And then you have inked slightly different faces, noses, chins, mouths, and hair and hats onto some of these. Can you talk about your process drawing this book? Because we have previously established that you draw with ink and also you letter by hand. And yet, for this book, there is something of a mix?
Well, I'd say about only about a half a dozen pages in this book are actually all the artwork is on one page. There are many other pages in which some of the figures were drawn on separate pieces of paper and scanned. What I was trying to do here was I drew one head, and then I thought, if I ink this head, how much variation can I get? Can I make one head eventually look like different people? And also I can see that I was trying to figure out how to draw the baseball hat on the head of the person. I haven't drawn a lot of baseball hats, or there's one of a enlisted man's dress uniform hat. How does that actually work? How does the bill look? These are it's all, to a certain extent, these are kind of like, I'm experimenting here to try to understand how things work. Because while it's nice to have certain things happen by accident nicely, when you're doing a big book like this, I think you have to kind of know what you're doing. You can't, you can't rely upon happenstance or luck or, something to make sure that something winds up being done correctly or good or looks good. You have to kind of know what you're doing. I have to say I'm a very good ear artist. I've drawn so many ears, and some people, when I was teaching, people say, I don't like to draw hands. I don't like to draw ears. Well, if you're one of those people, what you've got to do is you got to draw ears over and over again. You got to draw hands over and over again until you're comfortable with it, and it's never going to be perfect. I think perfection is something, it's maybe you want to do the best you can, but you got to be sometimes you have to settle for something that's good enough. And as I say, I think that comics is words and pictures. And if the story is good and people are hooked on it, then they will cut you a little bit of slack. But it was fun. I love drawing faces and I love drawing heads. So I didn't count the number of people in this drafted book, but I'm sure there are a few thousand really, if you get right down to it. But I'm one of the main characters, and I've drawn myself so many times that I'm very comfortable drawing myself. There's not a lot of guesswork. There's not a lot of wonder. I wonder what this is going to look like when I finish it. I pretty much know more or less what I can do, and I try to play to my own strengths to a certain extent. I knew that in drawing a book about the military, you were going to have to Russ Heath was a great military artist, and one of the reasons people liked it is because his tanks look like tanks, and his guns look like guns, and the uniforms weren't bullshit. That's really the way the web belt looks, or the canteen isn't like somebody's half-assed idea of a canteen. So I had to make sure that the military details were the jeeps and some of the buildings. I didn't use a lot of reference on some of the buildings because they were made pretty much by hand out of, pieces of wood and shingles. It was pretty easy to come up with how the buildings looked, but a lot of it was just things that I was good at, and I've always think I can draw characters' faces and stuff like that.
What I get a sense of, sort of particularly following your Facebook page and you sort of sharing the in progress the Artiste pages is I guess getting down the idea of the story and the stories behind it is probably the key thing here, and then sort of figuring out the exact nitty gritty of the final composition is sort of the thing that you can worry about that in the future. And I wonder about as well, to the extent that you find it useful just to have some of the process just marinating, that you're not instantly going with the final page and then putting it away, that it lives as a work in progress for a little while.
Well, I've learned that it's not good when you have to have somebody else approve your work. It's not good to put in 8 hours on a page, and do the final version, because that page may not even wind up being in there. So that's going to be thrown out. But I do think I'm going to show this to the editor, and I want to show him the story, and I want him to be able to read the story. I want him to understand what I think the dialogue is. I want him to see what is happening in the scene. And it's okay that the guy down here in panel 4 is just kind of a very rough figure, but he can see that there's somebody sitting at a drawing table and there's somebody else talking to him. And that person that's talking to him doesn't look anything like Larry Hama, but in the final version, that'll be Larry Hama. But before it becomes Larry Hama, the editor-in-chief is going to have to say, okay, that's good, that we want that in the book. That story, I think it takes up a couple of pages, 2 or 3 pages. That'll be in the book. So plus it's nice for me just to go ahead and get this whole thing down on paper. And I want to make sure that I'm including everything that I need to include, that I haven't left things out, that I have enough, a variety of, I want to make sure that there's certain people that you cannot do a book about Marvel Comics and not have certain people in there. And there's certain people that are just going to have to be left out. I'm very sorry you can't put everybody in there. But, this is a form, this is sort of, it's in this shape now where I can still make changes on it without having spending too much time on it. But this is fun, and this is fun. Sometimes working on making the pictures pretty, going back and drawing everything so that it really looks nice. There might be some people that really like doing that, but that's not my favorite part. My favorite part is probably doing the layouts and then writing the dialogue, for the people. And I always read everything out loud, 5 or 6 times. I always try to say everything that I'm saying. Is there a shorter way that can be said? Try to leave out any words that you possibly can, because they're all taking up space on the page. Or which words need to be emphasized so that you make sure that the reader understands what information you want them to have. I love this stuff. What can I tell you? It's fun.
A random question for you is that in the book you use a nice little sort of aspect of using shoes and boots as your sort of chapter breaks, and I notice you've got a giant boot over your shoulder. You spent a lot of time polishing boots in the army, and even right. Even Bill Clinton, I think it was, had right. one of your boots in his hands. So
yeah, that's right.
What's the appeal of a shoe or a boot to you?
I don't know. I don't know. It's it's fun to draw. I've always been kind of not obsessed with shoes and feet, but I thought about it. I had, like, I won't go into all the details about the different artworks I've done that had shoes and feet and stuff in them. But I think I like it. I think I'm interested in them because that's where people's feet touch the ground. It's through your shoes and your feet that you touch the ground, and by that you touch the world and everything in it. So I think that's what the significance is in my head somewhere. But I did spend a lot of time polishing boots in the Army, and and boots on the ground and boots in general and boot camp and all of this other stuff, But that drawing that you see back there, that was done in, I can't see how, I don't know how this chair works, but it was done in 1990. a friend of mine gave me a big piece of foam core. I'd never drawn on foam core before, but I'd been doing lots of little drawings on matchbook covers and selling them on the street of New York. I'd take a break from my lettering assignments and go downstairs and just, set up a table, a chair on the street and just start drawing different things, that whatever came into my head. And people were buying them for they were $3 each, two for $5, and no reasonable offers ever refused. And I did 1,000 drawings, many of which were boots. And I drew the boot so many times that I was able to just, it was just 68 marks on a piece of paper. And my muscle memory was so good. I knew how to do it. I could do it really quickly. And people would look at that and say, "Oh my God, look at this. Look at this, Ethel. It's like the drawing is appearing, by magic." And I didn't want to tell them, well, that's because I've drawn this same boot, 38 times, since last Wednesday, But I like drawing. I really love it. There's something about the act of drawing that really appeals to me. And the boot was on the wall in my studio, and my brother-in-law came through New York in 1992, and he was on his way to the Democratic National Convention, and this was being held at Madison Square Garden, which was right on the corner from where Lisa and I were living. And he said, "Can you draw a picture of Bill Clinton and Al Gore for me that I can carry with me to the show tonight and hold up?" I said, "Man, this is going to take me a week to do this." And he says, "You're an artist, aren't you?" And I thought, "My God, I'm going to be marrying this guy's sister. I know if I don't do what he says, I'm going to be hearing about this for the rest of my life." So I drew a quick picture of Bill Clinton and Al Gore arm in arm, and it said "excellent" above their heads. And then as he's leaving, he sees this boot back there, and he says, "Can you write Boot Bush and draw that boot on the back of this page and write Boot Bush on there?" And I said, "Hell yeah." I mean, I did that. It took me about 10 minutes to do that drawing. And he left there a happy man. And then that night, my mother-in-law called me up and said, "Rick, we were watching television and we saw Bill Clinton walking around holding your sign." And, that was kind of fun. And, it was fun to see that because I was one of those people my mother never liked my work, guys. She didn't discourage me from being an artist, and she was artistic herself, but she liked things that were pretty. And my artwork apparently wasn't pretty. My mother didn't. She liked Monet and different artists like that pretty. French Impressionism was a style that she liked. And when I got out of college, I remember I went back and showed my mother my college portfolio before going to graduate. "Ricky, your work is ugly. People don't like looking at ugly drawings." So I thought, well, okay, that hurt, Mother, that hurt. But if I'm going to be an artist that does ugly drawings, I'm going to be the best ugly artist I can. Anyway, that drawing of the boot would fall into the ugly art category, I'm sure. But my mother saw that, and Bill Clinton approved, and I felt finally I'm validated. The guy that's going to be president of the United States is smiling and laughing, and he likes my work. And it came out as on the front page of the Savannah Morning News. And as I walked out to get the newspaper to bring back to my mother and father, I saw as I got closer and closer to the machine, how they put it up next to the glass door. I saw my artwork coming through the glass door of the vending machine, and that was a weird experience. And I brought it back and I showed it to my mother. And you would think most people's mothers say, "You know what, Ricky, that's great. I think that's wonderful what you've done there." She didn't say anything bad about it, but she wasn't impressed, my mother. But I liked, and my mother it was the hardest thing for me to draw. The hardest character in the book to draw was my mother. It was really hard. I finally decided I'm just going to, this kind of feels like my mother. The drawing of my mother in the book doesn't look that much like my mother, but it sort of felt like my mother. And a lot of things that I do, if it feels right, that's good enough for me. I don't insist on, mirror accuracy. But it was fun, having your work on, national television and, in magazines and newspapers and all that kind of stuff. That was nice. It bolstered my confidence,
So, Rick, to sort of circle back round to from where we ended to where we started and what's next, I'll just point out that the back cover of Drafted is your font as a computer lettering, but it definitely looks like your letters.
Yes.
But the whole book, the book itself, is all hand lettered. The follow-up that you are writing and drawing now, the Artiste, will be lettered with computer using your font.
Well, I'm lettering with a computer using my font right now, and I'm not ruling out the possibility that I'm going to go back and re-letter the entire thing by hand. If you know, it's a lot of work, but I passed the point a long time ago where I worried about how much work something was or how long it was taking to do it. Artists work for years and years, and they never make any money at all. Most artists are probably, trying to, many artists have to work as waiters or cab drivers or truck drivers or something else. So, we got used to the fact that, we're not making the most efficient use of our time. But I'm going to hand letter it if I can. My eyesight isn't as good as it used to be. My hand, I'm not used to, haven't done that much lettering in a while now. So it'll be interesting. But if I can hand letter it, I would. And I've noticed that all of the really good artists use. I mean, there are plenty of really good artists that use their own font. But there are lots of other people who do everything by hand. Dan Clowes does his work by hand. I'm sure that Chris Ware does, his stuff by hand, and many others. But I prefer hand lettering. Like you, Tim, I prefer looking at something that's got some soul. It's got some humanity. It's got imperfections. It's unpredictable. It's easy to read, but it's unpredictable.
That said, a couple years ago, when I found on a website that you had made or someone had made for you a digital font of your handwriting, I smiled because it was in some ways the best of both worlds, because publishers aren't really hiring letterers now to letter by hand. A writer artist making their own book is an exception. And I thought, oh, there's Rick Parker's handwriting, but in that very clean, crisp, modern, uniform, neat and tidy format that we've gotten so used to.
Well, Nate Picos has a company called Blambot, and he took some lettering samples that I did, and he produced a really great font for me, and I'm very grateful to him for that. And it's really easy to do lettering that way. I mean, doing it by hand is another layer of difficulty. It's time consuming, it's messy, it's painful, I mean, it hurts. Your hands hurt sometimes as a result of, holding a pen in your hand for hours and hours, day after day for weeks or months or years or whatever. But, it's all part of, you got to, the old expression, you got to suffer for your art. I mean, I think that's true. I mean, now a lot of people have suffered for my art, but now I'm starting to suffer for my art a little bit myself. But I do, and I love doing the hand lettering. I enjoy it, but I want to get the story written and laid out and paced perfectly. And then, when it's all done and I've gotten the green light, they're not going to say, oh, by the way, Rick, do not go back and hand letter this, but I'm going to try, and maybe I can do it.
Mark, would you like to wrap this up?
I sure will. I will have one final question, which is just a bit of a random one, and then I'll wrap up properly.
I love random questions. I have random answers.
I saw a quote from Larry Hama in reply to a post that you had made, which I just wondered if you could explain, because I don't have the context behind it. If you're able to, he said, "And doors without numbers slammed shut."
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, one of the fun things, and I included a lot of these in my upcoming graphic novel, The Artiste, is that when you letter 30,000 pages at Marvel, you're going to make some mistakes, and some of those mistakes are going to creep through and get printed into the books. Well, that happened to me about a half a dozen times, and one of them was a book that Larry edited it or he wrote it, and the last panel of the last page showed a corridor like you were in a hotel room. In a hotel looking down the hallway, and there were doors on each side of the room. And the caption was supposed to say, "And doors without number slammed shut." I wrote, "And doors without numbers slammed shut." So And Larry actually thought that was funny. He didn't call me under the carpet. He didn't ask me if I had any remorse, but I guess he just thought he just shrugged his shoulders and thought it was funny. So it's another, it's another story. And that one, I've got a copy of. Somebody sent me that. I got a copy of that around here somewhere. And but there are a number of funny things happened, like that when I was working at Marvel, where these things actually accidentally got printed. I mean, I didn't mean for that to happen, but I never really got into any trouble with it, except that one time where I got fired from lettering G.I. Joe, which was just as well because Joe Rosen is a better letterer than I am, so he got to take it over.
So
I like Joe. He was good. Listen, it's been great talking to you guys. Really, I've had a great time. Thank you.
It's been a blast. All the Talking Joe listeners, watchers, drafted, available now in all good bookshops, probably in some not so good bookshops too. Who knows? So yeah, it's a great read. I really enjoyed it. Definitely seek it out. Maybe. If it's not too late, add it onto your Christmas list and ask a loving relative to buy it for you. It's definitely a great read and an interesting story. And I'm very much look forward to the sequel about you as the artiste, and also urge people to if they enjoyed hanging out with you just now, head on over to your Facebook page, give it a follow, and have a look at some of the things that you've been sharing over there, because it's a fascinating personal story and a fascinating time and place to be that sort of world of Marvel and beyond in that time period. So yeah, that's it from me. That's it from Rick, and that's it from Tim. And before we go, just remember that
nobody beats Talking Joe, an international podcast.
Great acoustics there, Tim. That worked very well. Laters.